Hey guys, in this video we'll discuss the leaked info from the new Grey Knights Codex, best and worst of it, and what you can expect as an opponent of this army as well as the user. So without further ado, let's dive right in. And I'll start with the positive stuff just because I don't want this video to be all negative, and I'll be honest, I was less than happy when I read all this, and you will learn by the end of the video why. But first, the good stuff. So mobility has definitely stayed one of the priorities of the army, which is great because the game of 40K is ultimately won and lost in the movement phase. You, of course, need to be able to do a lot of stuff in other phases of the game, and the movement phase is just a prerequisite for the success in those other phases, but it definitely everything starts in the movement phase. One of the things that made Grey Knights special has always been their ability to be mobile, which back in 8th edition was thanks to their Gate of Infinity psychic power, which allowed them to teleport around, and was pretty unique. It was not the only way to do it in the game, but it was one of few ways to do it. I'm glad to see a big part of it retained here in this edition of the Codex in the form of the good old Gate of Infinity ability, which is essentially the same as it was, only gaining the ability to keep your units in reserves if you don't need them at the moment, so you don't have to return them the same turn, and that's a very useful thing to have. Sometimes you just don't want to unit on the table, which also helps because sometimes you just want to like sort of accumulate stuff in your reserves and then drop them all at once, for example turn 3 or turn 4. All the detachments have mobility supporting stratagems, like literally every single one of them. Dread Knights have still retained their amazing advanced fallback, charge, and shoot ability, which is very powerful and like probably one of the most powerful abilities a unit at datasheet can even have. And even though now the 6-inch advance isn't automatic, you still have a very strong movement buff for them. They still move 8 inches, so they are going to be fast. Not as fast as they were before in the Index one, but if you play the Warbane Task Force or whatever the name is, you already didn't have that ability, and the Dread Knights were still amazing. Brotherhood champions now give advance and charge, and that's really good because wide availability of advance and charge is great to have. Unfortunately, they still, for some reason, maybe like one of you knows why the champions cannot lead the purifiers. I don't know why, and it doesn't make any sense to me from the lore standpoint, and I don't see a reason. But the purifiers would be a perfect vehicle. I mean, yes, they would be a perfect vehicle for the champion, but they cannot be. The fights first ability that the champions used to have was really useful, but to be honest, I personally, for Grey Knights, would want to have the advance and charge instead, because the Grey Knights that really live and die on how well you can move around, and you already have the teleportation part of the mobility, but it's not the only part that you need, which we're going to talk about a bit later in the video. But safe to say, you want some mobility that is on the board, and advance and charge helps with that. Librarians now they have the 18-inch loan up ability, which makes them their unit unshootable outside of 18 inches, and that's much easier now to move around like a 5 or even a 10-man squad of Terminators around the board without them being harassed by guns from all the way across the table. They can still be all the way 18 inches away, and there's no way for you to get to them fast enough, most likely even with the advance and charge, but that's besides the point. Grandmasters now discount stratagems once per round, as they should have been all along. And a small moment of silence for all the Grey Knights players that have been waiting for that for so long. And that is useful because mobility stratagems inside detachments and rapid ingress are going to be more affordable for you now. Obviously, it's all the same name for the ability for all Grandmasters, so you can only get one instance of that discount, but it's still useful. Second positive thing I like about the new Codex is all detachments seem to have an idea behind them and structure. So I can definitely tell that whoever was writing that was thinking about how this detachment is actually going to be utilized in real games. And that's something that we've seen in most codexes. I would not say all of them. Definitely there have been some blunders, like the Adeptus Custodes Codex of 10th edition, for example. When it was released, it was just horrific. And I don't know who wrote that piece of garbage. They had to do like several passes of fixes for the detachments for it to become playable and even good. It's still not a good codex, in my opinion. It's a bit too one-sided, but it definitely, the detachments themselves are ultimately became usable. In this case, I don't think we're gonna have that problem. Vehicle detachment called Sanctic Spearhead is really interesting in my opinion. It has that old mobility support detachment rule, which is advance 6 inches automatically on your vehicles and gain assault. Stratagems that allow you to move through terrain, fall back and charge, and you also have the good old Sigil of Exigence as your enhancement. For those who don't know, Sigil of Exigence, it's the when you shoot a Grey Knight's unit that has that enhancement, he can disappear from the board. And it was used for many things, but like on Grey Knight, Nemesis Dread Knights, it's pretty good. Well, as a great all-rounder strat for +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles, which by the way works for all Grey Knights units, not just the vehicles, unlike the other stratagems. So it's really gonna be great for like your supporting choices, like even your strike marines. If they need to charge a vehicle, they'll be able to do that with more efficiency. The Index Detachment, which kind of looks like the most well-balanced one, is the Brotherhood Strike, I think it's called. Has great reroll ones to hit and wound rule when you come from Deep Strike. The turn that you come from Deep Strike, you get reroll ones to hit to wound, and that's great for your shooting reliability. And in general, as an opponent of Grey Knights, I think they are, unfortunately, in my opinion, are shifting towards this sort of jumping gun that just moves around the board and shoots you, and maybe sometimes you kind of get to utilize the Nemesis power weapons, but mostly it's just about shooting. So that's what I would probably be preparing for. The good old Dread Knight jumping around the board and shooting you seems to be the very likely path that this codex is gonna go with or on, whatever. That detachment has really good stratagems. The one I specifically like a lot is the ability to teleport when your opponent falls back from you, and that happens so much in games. Like if you were an opponent of the Grey Knights player back in the Index times when there was the Mist of Daimos stratagem, it still exists technically now because the Codex is not released. So the Mist of Daimos was a reactive move, 6 inches, or if your opponent ends and move any kind of move within 9 inches of your unit, and that unit is not in engagement range, you could go back to reserves. And that was a very powerful strategy if you did not know how to counter it. But the way to counter it was to just have as many of your units move around the Grey Knights unit as possible, but leave one in engagement range, which locked that Grey Knight squad in. And then that last unit hopefully would be the one that could move further than 9 inches away from it, which some units definitely can, and then you don't proc the reactive move, and the Grey Knights unit is stood there being utterly blown to smithereens. This stratagem helps you prevent that, and it's really strong. That ability is great. 2 CP, which this one was 1 CP, the 2 CP stratagem is Gate of Infinity out of combat, and that's again really good. It also allows you to gate an extra unit, and in this detachment you want to gate as much stuff as possible because that's how you activate your reroll. Also have the 3-inch Deep Strike, which I was not expecting for it to appear again here. I mean, obviously for now it's balanced by the balanced data slate, so it will be a 6-inch Deep Strike, but I don't know, maybe they will allow Grey Knights to be special, but I don't think so. It's still, 6-inch Deep Strike is still a good rule. Unfortunately, some armies can 6-inch Deep Strike and then charge. Grey Knights cannot. You also have a useful stealth stratagem, so when your unit gets shot, you can just have -1 to hit for that. So a good suite, like solid suite of stratagems. I really like the Index Detachment. The next one is sort of a combat one. The Banishers has useful lethal sustain hits ability for your melee to actually make Grey Knights resemble the melee experts that they should be. But unfortunately, that one activates on a leadership test. So like all other armies get to use their rule just because they get to use the rule. The Grey Knights need to roll a 6 on the dice, or maybe a 5 if you're lucky, if you have a chaplain in the squad, which you have no real reason to have a chaplain in the unit because chaplains are crap. So you would almost always roll a 6, and you will fail that roll, and you cannot re-roll it. So you have a detachment rule which will fail you in the most important moments when you really needed it. And I honestly think that it should have been like automatic, you get 1, and if you pass some sort of test, probably not a leadership test, but like maybe a harder test, you get to use both of them. That would be cool. But in its current state, I cannot trust it enough, but it's still not a bad detachment because it has good stratagems, it has advance and charge, which you can use for your Terminators. It has old Mists of Deimos, so 6-inch thing, and it's a powerful strat. You have a 12-inch no-go zone stratagem, so nothing can deep strike within 12 inches of it. So depending on what detachment you're going to be playing against with Grey Knights, you'll have to counter one of these tactics. So for Mists of Deimos, we've already looked at that. For the fallback option, well, sometimes, I mean the index detachment, you sometimes just don't fall back and just shoot into combat if your tank is in combat with the unit, and hopefully you don't have blast weapons. So you will have to counter a specific detachment because Grey Knights will play very differently depending on what their actual chosen detachment is going to be. And there's also a 5-up Film of Pain versus damage 1, so very specific, very weirdly specific ability, but again, it's pretty good because there are sometimes cases when you're actually being assailed specifically by damage 1 stuff. The Terminator detachment, so specifically for Terminators with a solid like overall pack of abilities, a good fallback and charge, shoot rule for your detachment, so all your Terminators can fall back, charge, and shoot. That's great, but the rest of the abilities are kind of okay. A +1 attacks for Terminators is good. It's not going to be groundbreaking, but if you're running like a big pack of Paladins, which we're going to talk about in a second, it's not bad, definitely. And charge mortals, always useful. You get to roll a dice for each Grey Knights units within an engagement range, and with big bases it's not going to be a lot of them, but you will get some, and a maximum of 6 is pretty good. D6 reactive move, so it's worse than the one in the Banishers detachment, but it's on the Terminators, so kind of I guess that's the balance. Though that combat detachment one, I think it activates for Psyker infantry or Psyker units, so you could use that on the Terminators anyways. If I understood correctly, and conditional -1 to wound, that one is actually really useful because the Grey Knights Terminators love to be able to have some sort of extra defense. The Mobilities detachment, which is the weirdest one, a Gurium task force, it's hardest for me to gauge because I don't really get it. The ability to keep one unit on the table instead of teleporting the maximum amount for a Gate of Infinity, so you teleport 2 instead of 3 for 2,000 points, and you get to teleport it in the reinforcement step of your movement phase instead of like earlier at the end of your opponent's turn. So it's cool. It's probably even strong for board control wise, it's strong, but I'm not sure that the stratagems, the fact that the stratagems are not great, and this ability in general, they cover, like, for example, the amazing suite of stuff that you have in the index one. But in any case, all detachments have an idea behind them, and they're all pretty reasonable, especially the first 4. I think they all have their own place. As always, I want to remind you about my Patreon 40K coaching service. If you're looking for help building your competitive rosters, preparing you for tournaments, or have any questions about your collection in general, check out the links for my Patreon in the description. Thank you. Now the datasheets improved, so some of them were improved. The Purgation squads lost their indirect ability, but gained the -2 move, -2 charge against the unit that they hit. It's a very useful ability because you get to slow down the melee armies that are very dangerous for you, especially now when there are so many good, really good melee armies like Blood Angels and Emperor's Children and World Eaters. They're all amazing. You want to have at least some ability to slow them down on the approach. Won't work against Knights, unfortunately. Well, I mean, fortunately for the Knight players, but definitely unfortunately for the Grey Knight players. The Grandmaster in Nemesis Dread Knight has a permanent full reroll to hit, wound, and damage now against monsters and vehicles, which is an obvious upgrade compared to the once per game bullshit that it was before, and so much more dangerous now as game goes on. The new Sublimator Melta thing is probably also good because you want to have that instead of the Flamer, I think. And the Grey Knights, they need the anti-tank, so having the Melta for something is definitely useful, especially considering that you kind of should be close because of your teleporting around. So Yeah, I guess you should be close. You will not be able to activate the Melta when you Gate of Infinity, but you will be able to activate it if you do the 3-inch Deep Strike thing. Just 6-inch Deep Strike thing, but you get what I'm saying. His ability now, like all Grandmasters, discounts stratagems by 1, and all stratagems by 1, not just like everything that is 2 CP becomes 1 CP, weirdness that the Grandmaster used to have. The new mace is also great against knights. So in the index detachment, you have the devastating wounds for 2 CP. So if you stack that with the anti-character 2+ damage 3 mace, you get to essentially apply 15 mortal wounds to any knight every time you fight, which, I mean, that's strong. Paladins lost their -1 to wound, conditional -1 to wound, and gained +1 damage for their weapons on the charge. And that's important, their damage. They don't give anything to their character because Grey Knights don't get to have nice things. Damage 3 on Terminators is always welcome, and I always wanted Paladins to feel like the amazingness that they are supposed to be. I'm gonna always remind you guys, if you did not know, and most of you probably don't, Paladins used to be the only Terminators in the game of 40k who had 3 wounds. Back in 8th edition, they were the only Terminators who had 3 wounds, and that was something I was very proud of as a Grey Knights player. They are no longer that special. So something good for them is great to see. And if you want to fact check me, I'm not talking about the non-Space Marine Terminators like Obliterators, or which are not really Terminators, or Alaris, for example, in Custodes. I'm talking about Space Marine Terminators specifically. They were 2 wounds back when Paladins were 3. They also attached the Brother Captain to them to get lethal hits, and 40 attacks with Strength 6, AP 2, Damage 3 hitting on 2s with lethal hits. That's a pretty substantial amount of damage, for sure. You're gonna pay a lot for this combo, probably like more than 500 points or close to 500 points, but it's gonna pack a punch. And they now finally have Apothecaries, which for whatever reason they could not have before. Purifiers now have rerolls to wound in combat on objectives and reroll once always. It's obviously a better ability than their previous add 1 to hit if the unit you're attacking is below starting strength, and add 1 to wound if below half strength. Much easier to use. And I mean, if you could join the Brother Captain to them, that would be just an ultimate infantry squad. For now, they're just good. Thankfully, in Exactors, yeah, I said that before incorrectly, Banishers is the wrong name. Exactors is the actual name for the detachment. You can actually advance and charge them anyway, so it's not bad that you can attach the champion, and Crow is pretty similar to what he was, so running them together probably sounds like a decent idea still. Crow now rerolls hits against characters, which is a very weird ability to have considering that he hits on 2s, but I mean, like, character with -1 to hit probably is what they're thinking about. And he doesn't blank damage anymore, so you do not really use that much, I think. So reroll hits is at least an active ability that you can use before your squad dies, so in that sense it's an upgrade. And the regular Grandmasters we discussed before, their ability now allows you to discount CPs like a normal captain would, and they have a one-off +3 attacks +3 strength for their melee, which, I mean, that's cute. I love Grandmaster fighting. Unfortunately, there are very few good melee weapon enhancements in the Codex, so you might get a couple. You might make like a really powerful Grandmaster, but he's still not going to be fighting like, for example, a Space Marine Captain with Finest Hour and a good enhancement and the Assault Intercessors attached to him. He's going to be pretty good, but not that good, I think. Now we are moving on to the weaknesses, to the things that I really don't like about this new codex, at least as far as I can see. Obviously, I'm using the information that is not official. I mean, it's the actual codex, but maybe something is going to change on day one. Probably not, but I need to give you that caveat. But first one, librarians have lost their ability to do mortal wounds at range, which was, in my opinion, like a cornerstone, a very important thing about the Grey Knights was their ability to do mortal wounds at range, and now they lost it. Instead, the librarians have the Vortex of Doom, which is d6 +3 attacks at strength 8, AP2, damage 2. Instead of doing 2+, on the 2+, you do 2d3 mortal wounds. On 2d6, you do 6 mortal wounds. You could do some mortal wounds back to you, but you could ignore those. So now you don't do that. This is not a catastrophe, especially if we retain access to Warbane Task Force with all the hit rerolls, and most likely we will. So you can just keep running all the Dread Knights with all the shooting and still be pretty good against vehicles without the librarians. A lot of people were not running them anyways, but in my opinion they were a really interesting way of making sure your Grey Knights can actually counter some anti-tank, and now this is essentially cut out of the Codex. The librarians themselves are not bad, so I'm not saying they're bad. I like their ability to give their squad 18-inch loan up, and the fact that they do have some volume of not bad shooting, and they're also probably not going to be nearly as expensive as they were before, means that we will actually keep seeing them on the tables. They're just in a very different state now, and army-wide there is a gap now for this very applicable liquid, financially speaking, ability to do damage to tanks and monsters. So I feel also another thing, which is about shooting output of the army. I think that the Stone Bolters are again completely underutilized in this Codex, and they have been forgotten almost entirely, and there is no attempt here to somehow buff them or solve that problem, which I think that the Stone Bolters that every single Grey Knight has, they should be a part, like a core part of the army. There should be more mechanics around them, Cybolt ammunition, all that stuff that we used to have in 8th, 9th edition. There is nothing like that now. There's like one stratagem that allows you to have pistol and twin links on your Stone Bolters, but let's be honest, this is more of a placeholder that we would look at and say like, okay, we have -1 stratagem in this detachment, instead of something that is really going to be useful and used a lot, especially considering that that stratagem only buffs Stone Bolters. So as soon as you have any special weapons in the squad, you're essentially wasting a part of your command point onto weapons that are not going to be affected by a stratagem. And with the psi weapons on infantry, the silencer, the psi cannon, the incinerator, they all feel like the added bonus category of weapons instead of what they should feel like, which I think this is a problem of the prices. So because they cannot price the special weapons individually, they have to give us like a mean price for the whole package, and that makes it impossible for them to differentiate between an expensive Grey Knight squad with all the cool psi cannons and a cheap squad with just the Stone Bolters, which I hope they will come back to that in 11th edition, because this really impedes their designing ability, I think. And like an easy fix for psi cannons, in my opinion, would be they are strength 8, AP1, damage 2, and there is like an obvious fix, which is give them in Gnorc's cover, because the heavy psi cannons do that. It makes sense lore-wise, and this would at least make them usable in the current game, because AP1 without ignore cover is just nothing. It's worthless. And lastly, the psychic element of Grey Knights is now almost exclusively just a lore aspect, because you are not really gonna feel them being psychic when they're like abilities reroll wounds or something. You're not thinking about that this way. No matter how many times they give you the keyword psychic in the ability, it doesn't really change it. You still feel like it's just a unit ability. It's not something that you cast, which I was hoping for the Grey Knights Codex to go in the same way as the Thousand Suns book, which allowed you again to roll dice, to have that random modifier where you roll something and then something else happens. That would be so cool, and I think for Grey Knights and Thousand Suns, they should do that. Okay, you don't want to have a full psychic phase for all the other psychic stuff in the game. Okay, I understand that, but Thousand Suns and Grey Knights are like the psychic armies in the whole 40k, and they should have that special treatment, I think. And they don't, not the Grey Knights, unfortunately, and that's just bland. It feels like they are just silver space marines that move around a lot. Next, something that I was kind of expecting in my mind, but not in my heart, which is old units are gone and new units are essentially absent if we don't count the Grey Knights Master, Nemesis Dread Knight Master, which is essentially the same model. Drago is gone, and that is horrible. Long live Drago. It's bad because with him, we have lost the sole reliable delivery vehicle for a charge in the entire army. He was carrying that honor title himself on his back, and now Drago is back to the warp, which means that Grey Knights are back to being a fast gun army instead of what they should be, which is a hybrid do-it-all army that is just very, very expensive. But more on that in a second. It's also the only damage 3 source. Now Paladins have that, but not at AP 4 and Strength 8 with lethals from Terminator Squad that he leads, so it's not the same. The only new model is that Grandmaster Nemesis Dread Knight, and the last Grey Knights model was released now officially 4 years before that. 4 years. You heard it right, let it sink in. Like, in this span of time, there have been probably 50,000 Space Marine Lieutenants released, and in this whole time we've only gotten Crow, and now a week ago, or like 2 weeks ago, we received the new Grandmaster Nemesis Dread Knight. I don't know why there's such a disregard for Grey Knights. I don't really understand that, because like there is just something about Grey Knights and Deathwatch specifically that makes the GW designers feel like they need to not pay attention to them. I have no other way to describe it. They tried to kill Deathwatch, and then the whole Deathwatch community rose up, and GW were like, okay, I guess we can leave them in the game. And then now the Grey Knights are being just ignored for so many years, even though their fans are very loyal as for all factions, but probably like Grey Knights fans are more loyal than some other ones, let's say. And they're still not getting new Terminators, no general refresh of the model line, or even just a new unit altogether. Okay, you don't want to refresh the whole thing yet, but just give us something. Okay, maybe give us the new Drago without killing the old Drago, if that would be not too hard. I mean, you did that with a lot of other Space Marine factions. Why not the Grey Knights? Captain Stern wasn't popular, but still contributes to the whole negative growth of the number of data sheets in the faction. And yeah, he's also gonna be missed. And the new Grey Knights Grandmaster Nemesis Dread Knight model is, I think, aesthetically a questionable upgrade, but I will let you draw that conclusion because this is not factual. That's just my personal opinion. And lastly, last but definitely not least, is the whole balance of the Grey Knights as a faction as it stands. So Grey Knights are a traditionally hard army to balance, and I understand that. I'll give that to GW because they are, based on the lore, or sort of omnipotent. They are psychers, they can teleport, they have nemesis weapons, they have the psi weapons, they have the Aegis armor, they have the Bastion Seed, so they're like amazing, the best Space Marines. And trying to get all that into the game was always a challenge, but it feels like this iteration of GW's Grey Knights is probably going to be the weirdest one and furthest one from feeling like this, like what it should feel, in my opinion. And the biggest thing that I hate about this Codex, and for this one I will actually use such a strong word, I hate the fact that the whole Codex has not a single way, and you heard me right, not a single way to charge out of Deep Strike on a better roll than a 9. Not a 1. And this is obviously a decision that they've carefully made and avoided mentioning in the Warhammer community article, where they have specifically said that, oh, your army wants to charge on a 9-inch, but that's a gamble, so here is your reroll, so it makes it all better. Which they know that it doesn't make it better. You already can reroll your charge when you need to with the command point reroll, so there's nothing special about giving the charge reroll. And instead they blatantly ignore that fact, making new players, like beginner players, believe that this is what they're supposed to be doing with their new nice shiny models. They're supposed to be going there and trying to roll a 9 and then, oh no, I failed to roll a 9. Who would have thought? Well, math would have thought. Stats. It's 44% chance. You're not doing that. Maybe if you have like 3 units that are charging the same thing, but Grey Knights are not that good in combat to be able to kill whatever you need to kill with one unit that it has been able to charge. Unless that unit is a 10-man squad of paladins, and you can only probably have like 3 of them in the army without exhausting all your points. So it's just obnoxious. When we imagine demon hunters teleporting into combat, we imagine them teleporting into combat, not like 100 yards away from combat and walking there like losers. So I don't really understand why they did that. They honestly think that they're gonna break the whole game if the Grey Knights were given like an option to roll an 8 out of Deep Strike? I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. If you have another, like, if you have a better argument, if you disagree with me, please feel free to share that in the comment section below. I don't understand that. When you're allowing Death Shroud Terminators to charge on a 6 with almost no effort to make that buff a reality, when you're allowing Tyranid monsters like Horse Spexes to roll a 6 on the charge with their burrowing tunnels, and a bunch of other armies have at least a +1 to the charge roll, you're giving the teleportation Gate of Infinity mobility specialist nothing? That's just dumb. I don't understand that, and it really made me sad. When I read that, I like reread the Codex a couple of times, and I was just speechless when I found nothing to be able to charge from Deep Strike. And please don't say Rapid Ingress, because it's not the same thing. It's just not. And yeah, I guess we have to be happy that we have had the Grey Knights Index for that long, because apparently Grey Knights Index was really good in terms of the ability to charge from Deep Strike and the actual mobility, not this kind of weird mobility just for the shooting. Which makes it even worse, the fact that they have this great detachment with reroll 1s to hit and wound, where you are not actually going to be using that reroll 1s to hit and wound, because if you Rapid Ingress, your reroll 1s to hit and wound is gone by the end of the turn. If you just Deep Strike, well, you're not rolling the 9. You're just stood there, and your rerolls are gone by the time your opponent comes and charges you. Your dumb silver ass. But yeah, here's the mixed bag that is the new Grey Knights Codex. I don't know what to say. I definitely know one thing. I'm probably not going to be playing this for a while. I want to see what people come up with. And one thing is important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this army is weak. I'm sure there are going to be plenty of people who can find ways to make it a tournament winning army. Like anything nowadays can win the tournament, and that's a testament to GW's ability to write good rules, and they can definitely write good rules. They proved that time and time again. But just from the design standpoint, I think this codex is, to say it softly, a bit of a blunder, in my opinion. Tell me what you think in the comment section below. I really want to hear your opinion. I sincerely am saying that, not just for the sake of better algorithm engagement. Really, I really want to know what you think. Thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.